forsaken, not a friend could I find, but I was praying both night and day. I was praying to Jesus to show me the way. My friends, they all forsake me. They never visit my home. Just me and my family. With Jesus we live alone. Now I am a soldier. I am fighting at the front, and I know I'm gonna win, for Jesus is waiting at the end. How I wish that my children would come to me and say, "Dear Daddy, I found Jesus, and now I'm home to stay." One of my earliest memories of churches is hearing that song. Old brother used to sing that. Couldn't read a word. Seen him hold the songbook upside down when he was singing. Couldn't identify anything like the alphabet. But man, could he sing and preach. He'd stand about 10 minutes, usually, and there wouldn't be a dry eye in the house. It's such a pretty sound, and you know, I thought a lot about that. How easy we lose sight of what really serving God is. We get so caught up in so many things. And churches, they just don't seem to help that case. Everybody seems to want to have church, but they sure seem to lose sight of having Jesus. You know, I know a brother. Let's pray. I'll just speak for a few minutes and get you the song ready. And, you know, the brothers used to be real bad after church on Sunday. They'd all go to somebody's house for dinner. And they'd sit around, and I know this because it was usually my mom's house. And they would sit around while the sisters was cooking dinner. And they would discuss the church and the scriptures. And they'd go back and forth. And they'd spend their time meditating on those things. And talking about it. And they used to be so concerned about Jesus. And I guess that's why we try so hard to keep our church so simple. To keep the things that don't pertain to Jesus away. Because as humans, we fall for it just like that. And I remember one time when going over to a baptizing. We would have to drive over to a place for baptizing. And in one of the cars, Listen, there was a couple of preachers and a couple of sisters, and you know, they'd all crowd in the cars and nobody worried about having enough seat belts. They just would all cram in. You know, and on the way over to that baptizing, one of the brothers started singing a song in that car. Listen, and there was a sister in the back seat that took off shouting, sitting in that car. And Brother Clarence Owens was sitting up in the passenger seat, and he started preaching just as hard as he could preach. Listen, can you imagine what somebody must have thought when they passed that car? Listen, you got a brother driving along singing a song. I can just see Carol, Sister Kansas, that was sitting in the back seat that started shouting. Listen, can you imagine what this world would have thought about that? But I want to ask you today, what kind of props did they have to feel that way? Listen, just pray just for a minute at a time. Sometimes we just need to take a breath, listen, and just strip down some of the, the ornaments that we've got, and just come down on our knees in true and undefiled religion. Listen, I've got news for everybody. Why my religion's not contained in any kind of church building. Listen, I didn't find my religion in a church house. I found it in a little poor home. Listen, up in Michigan there, a little 2-bedroom home. Why I found my Lord there. Listen, and you know what? There wasn't even any preaching going on. There wasn't any singing going on. But no, just the opposite there in a little dark room on a little cot pushed over in the corner. Listen, why little sisters, listen, sleeping over in another bed in the same room there. Why I found my religion right there, listen, why, and it was between me and my Lord. Oh God, what kind of religion do you have? Why, and how sincere are you? Why, what's between you and Jesus today? Oh God. Sometimes I worry that, listen, Brandon, why I worry that, Shad, we get so caught up in the substance of our blessings that we lose sight of the blesser that sent them our way. Right. Oh God, sometimes I worry that we get so caught up in the things that God's given us that we forget God's certain. Oh God, and it's so easy for us to let it happen to us. Why don't you know that? Don't you think that? Why, in all honesty and sincerity, we talked about it all the time, but don't you think, Brandon, if you truly, listen, was there and looked up on the hill, and you looked up on that cross, and that man was hanging there, listen, tore all the pieces there, listen, that was real, people, that wasn't just a book, that really happened there. Oh God, don't you think it would change the way you look at every blessing that you've got? You looked at your little children. Listen, we know that God blessed you with them. But oh God, but don't ever get your eyes on them and forget about that man that gave them to you. Listen, we need to hold on to him. People today, why, you know, it's just like listen, Paul, one time he come into a city there, listen, and he began preaching to them there. Why? Listen, and as he began to preach to them, and they began to bring their sick to him there, and he began to heal them. Oh God, that city was so moved with that. Listen, they thought, what a great man that Paul is. Listen, oh, Lord, son, and it was Paul and Barnabas was there, and they loved them so much because of the miracles they were doing, and they thought they're such holy men, and that they said the gods have come down to us, and they called, they called Barnabas, and they called him Jupiter, and Paul they called Mercurius, and they went and got cattle, and the king did, the governor of that city, and he said, we're going to sacrifice to these gods that came down here. That's how much, Brandon, they looked at them, but oh God, and it said that Paul and Barnabas there ran out and stopped them and preached Jesus to them. And you know what? And when they preached Jesus to them, they took Paul out and they began to stone him there. In 5 minutes time there, and they went from sacrificing to Paul until they dragged him out when they heard the truth, because the truth can hurt sometime, and they stoned Paul and they left him for dead there. And it says that the disciples stood around there looking at Paul when he was killed there, and they said, Paul, he got up and he dusted himself off and he headed back to the city. Lord, people, I can't hardly get through a bad day at work without I lose sight of my Lord. I can't hardly work on my car without I get aggravated and I lose sight of my Lord. Oh God. But you better believe when we got troubles, when we're worried, sis, and I know you are, we remember where our help comes from. Here. All right, and you know that I was reading this little book at home. And this it's an old book. This guy was a preacher back in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. And he said that he lived in Gary, Indiana, and that he was called to preach up in Buffalo, New York. And so he took the train up there, and he said, and they had a big crowd there. And he said, and just when he was about to preach, when they was calling on him, somebody come up and handed him a little piece of paper, and and it was a telegram from his wife, and it was telling him that one of the little neighbor children, a little 2.5-year-old girl, got killed in their neighborhood, and you need to try to be home for the funeral. And he said, Brandon, it tore him all to pieces. And you know, and he got through that. And he took the train home. And he said he kept thinking about that little mom who'd been coming out to their church. Says, listen, said she hadn't been coming long, but she seemed like such a devout Christian. And he was worried, how is this going to affect her? Listen, he said he was afraid she was gonna take her eyes off Jesus because of the troubles that she was going through. He said he couldn't get that little girl out of his mind, the one that got killed, 2.5 years old. He said had curly blonde hair, and they'd let her get up on the train tracks, and the train had hit her. Listen here, oh God. And he said, when he seen that mom, the mother of that little girl, he said, yeah, she was crying, yeah, she was hurting, but she told him, she said, it's so good to serve the master that can help me in my troubles here. And you know, Brandon, they said, listen, a couple months later, the conductor of that train finally went to visit that woman, and he wasn't a believer at all. Listen, and it must have been hard for him to finally go back and see her, and said she invited him in her home. Listen, sitting down and began talking to him and talked to him about Jesus. Listen, and she said, I know the anguish you must be going through because of this accident. And she said, let me tell you about the one that got me through this. And she began talking to him. Listen, they said a couple months later, Brandon, he got baptized. Oh God, my Lord's in control. You know why that woman said that when she said that, she's thankful that God don't make mistakes. It wasn't a mistake that he took her little girl home. She said, because my God don't make mistakes. Oh God, you want to see sin and sorrow, follow me around. You want to see mistakes, just look into my life. But I'm telling you that when I get called home, listen, and Chad, I am going home one day. People, when I get called out of here, I don't want to leave one stone unturned. I've been to too many funerals, listen, where they'll have to get up here. And they'll have to get up here and they'll have to say, well, I think he was a good man. I went over his house one day and he had a Bible open, so he was probably a good man. Listen, or when I would get up and say, well, he was a good fella. I've never seen him hurt anybody. Oh God, I don't want there to be any doubt in this world. I don't want there to be any doubt in anybody I work with, and anybody I'm related to, and any of my grandchildren. I don't want there to be any doubt. Listen, on which side I'm on and who I'm serving here, because when my Lord calls my name, I'm telling you right now, I'm going home. Listen, this place is not home. People, listen, I'm going home someday. And I know and I understand that we let things come up and let make us down. But you know, when Paul was traveling, when he was preaching Jesus, listen, and things were getting harder on him and the persecution was growing, and they was eating dinner at a place, and there was a prophet that come out of the hills, and came down there where he was. And he walked up to Paul, and he took the belt right off of him, and he tied his own hands up. He says, this is the way that you're going to be bound when you get down to that city you think you're going to. Listen, and the brothers and sisters around begin to cry and begging Paul, don't go down there. Don't go down there, and where they're going to hurt you. Listen, but Paul looked at him and he said, what mean ye to weep and to break my heart? Listen, I'm ready not only to be bound like this, but I'm ready to give my life for my Lord. And the Bible said, and they followed Paul out of the city. And when they got outside, they all knelt down. Listen, outside the city, the whole congregation did, and held prayer out there. Listen, and sent him on his way. Brandon, listen, it can't get more stripped down than that. It can't get more simple than that in serving God. Listen, I know so many people, and they think they got to have all this stuff going on at church, and they got to have all these youth groups and all these plays and all these activities. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy having a good time and having fun, but let's not lose sight when it comes time to worship. You might as well take your tie off and your jacket off. Listen, you might as well take the pictures off the walls and take the chandeliers down. And when it comes time to worship, there's only one way to worship, and that's in spirit and in truth. And listen, aren't you glad that's the way that it is? Listen, aren't you glad in your car you can worship in spirit and in truth? Aren't you glad at the shop when it's so noisy you can't even hear yourself talk? You can stand there and worship in spirit and in truth. I've done it many times. Men's Kitchen's a song. When Men's Kitchen's a song, I've had them working old hot foundry labor when I was young, and it was so noisy you had to wear double hearing protection in there. And I was working there when I felt like I was called to preach. And I've had them come up and ask me, who you talking to? Listen, and you know what? And I'd make up something to tell them. Not because I knew, I was afraid that they'd think I was crazy. If I told them I was preaching, standing up there, they wouldn't understand. I want to say that the church door is open. If there's somebody here that feels like that they belong to God, He is theirs. Listen, if you feel like that Jesus is your Savior and you want to make this little church your home, we're glad to receive you.